When a broken teacher walks into an emergency room with the same lies she's told for years, she doesn't know the stranger in the next bed will destroy everything: her carefully constructed silence, her illusions of safety, and the man who has been slowly killing her. Marcus Valente is not a hero. He is something far more dangerous, a man who recognizes the specific grammar of violence written across her body, and who will not look away. What begins as intervention becomes inevitability. Some rescues require blood. This is that story. If you want to see how far survival can take someone, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's emergency room buzzed with the particular frequency of institutional indifference. Elena Ward sat in the plastic chair, her left wrist cradled against her chest, and recited the same lie she had perfected over 3 years of practice. I fell down the stairs. The intake nurse didn't even look up from her clipboard. She had heard this particular fiction so many times it had lost all narrative weight. Just another line in an endless script of broken women and the implausible accidents that befell them with such unfortunate regularity. Scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the pain? 6, Elena lied. It was closer to 9, but admitting that would invite questions she couldn't answer. Questions led to concern. Concern led to involvement, and involvement led to consequences she couldn't survive. The nurse made a notation. Someone will be with you shortly. Shortly, in emergency room parlance, meant anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 hours, depending on who was bleeding out in the trauma bays. Elena settled into the chair and tried to make herself smaller, invisible, forgettable. It was a skill she had cultivated with the dedication other women applied to yoga or French lessons. The waiting room was a study in human misery rendered mundane by repetition. A construction worker held a blood-soaked towel to his hand. A mother bounced a feverish toddler on her knee. 2 police officers flanked a handcuffed man who was either very drunk or very concussed, possibly both. And in the corner, mostly hidden behind a privacy curtain that someone had forgotten to fully close, a man sat upright on a gurney with the stillness of a predator conserving energy. Elena wouldn't have noticed him at all if he hadn't spoken. "You didn't fall down any stairs." His voice carried across the waiting room with perfect clarity despite its low volume. It was a voice accustomed to being heard without being raised. Elena's head snapped toward him, her pulse spiking with the specific terror of being seen. The man watching her from the gurney looked like violence rendered elegant. Dark hair, darker eyes, olive complexion marked with exhaustion and something else. Pain, controlled but present. His left shoulder was wrapped in gauze that was slowly seeping red at the edges. A gunshot wound, Elena realized with the strange detachment that trauma sometimes provided. He had been shot recently and was sitting in an emergency room with the composure of someone waiting for a delayed flight. "Excuse me." Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. "The stairs." He gestured vaguely with his right hand, the movement economical and precise. "That's not what happened to you." She should have looked away, should have wrapped herself in the protective armor of denial and offense that well-meaning strangers usually triggered. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not pity, which she had learned to hate, but recognition. He knew. Not the details, but the shape of it. The architecture of abuse. "I don't know what you're talking about." The lie felt even more hollow than usual. "Yes, you do." He shifted slightly on the gurney, and she caught the smallest wince before his expression smoothed back into neutral. "I'm not going to ask you about it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I'm going to give you something, and you're going to decide whether or not you want to use it." Elena's hands began to shake. She clasped them together in her lap, trying to still the tremor. "I don't need anything from you." "Maybe not tonight." He reached into the pocket of the jacket draped across his lap with his good arm and withdrew a business card. Plain white. No logo, just a phone number printed in black. He set it on the small table between their chairs. "But eventually, you will. And when you do, that number will answer. Anytime, day or night." "Who are you?" "Someone who understands that some situations require intervention." He leaned back against the raised portion of the gurney, his expression unreadable. "And someone who has the resources to provide it. Before Elena could respond, a nurse emerged from the double doors leading to the treatment area. Marcus Valente? The man stood with the fluid grace of someone for whom physical pain was merely data to be processed and filed away. That's me. We're ready for you now. He walked past Elena without another glance, disappearing through the doors with the nurse. The business card remained on the table between them like a live grenade with the pin half pulled. Elena stared at it for a long moment. Then, with movements that felt disconnected from conscious thought, she picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. 3 hours later, with her wrist splinted and wrapped, armed with prescriptions she couldn't afford to fill and discharge instructions she wouldn't follow, Elena stepped out into the November cold. Her car was in the parking garage. David's car, technically, though he let her use it when he didn't need it, which was another form of control she had learned not to examine too closely. The drive home took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to return to the apartment they shared, the one with his name on the lease and her silence embedded in every wall. 20 minutes to construct the explanation he would demand, the apology she would offer, the careful choreography of de-escalation she had mastered. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had seen better decades. Elena climbed the stairs slowly, each step a negotiation with her injured wrist and fractured composure. The door was unlocked. He was home, waiting. She found David in the living room exactly where she had left him 4 hours ago, though he had added several empty beer bottles to the landscape of his anger. He looked up when she entered, his expression cycling through irritation, assessment, and something that might have been remorse if you didn't know better. There you are. His voice was carefully calibrated to reasonable concern. I was worried. This was how it always started, the reset, the recalibration. The implicit suggestion that perhaps she had overreacted to whatever had happened before. I'm fine. Elena set her purse on the counter, keeping the kitchen island between them. They said it's just a bad sprain. Good. That's good. He stood, and she tracked his movements with the peripheral awareness of someone who had learned to read violence in body language. But he just walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. You hungry? I could order something? I'm tired. I think I'll just go to bed. Elena. His voice stopped her halfway to the bedroom. I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. You know how I get when I'm stressed about work. She knew. Knew that his stress became her bruises, knew that his bad days became her broken bones, knew that his apologies were just intermissions between acts of escalating violence. It's okay, she heard herself say, because that was her line in this script. Come here. It wasn't a request. Elena walked to him because refusing would make things worse, and worse was something she spent every moment trying to avoid. He pulled her into an embrace that felt like a threat wrapped in affection, his arms a cage she had learned to accept. I love you, he whispered into her hair. You know that, right? I know. Good. He released her. Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning. Elena escaped to the bedroom and closed the door with the careful silence of someone who had learned that even the sound of a door closing could be interpreted as defiance. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the business card from her pocket. Just a phone number, 10 digits that supposedly connected to someone who understood, someone who could provide intervention. She should throw it away, should flush it down the toilet, and forget the dark-eyed stranger in the emergency room who had looked at her and seen through 3 years of carefully constructed lies in under a minute. Instead, she slipped it between the pages of the book on her nightstand, a collection of poetry she had bought before David, when she still believed in the transformative power of beautiful language, and tried to sleep. The next 2 weeks passed in the careful rhythm Elena had learned to maintain. She went to work at Jefferson Elementary, taught her second graders about addition and subtraction, about the magic of reading and the importance of kindness. She smiled at her colleagues, deflected their concern about her splinted wrist with the practiced ease of long repetition, and existed in the space between visibility and erasure that had become her entire world. David was on his best behavior, attentive without being smothering, apologetic without being pathetic. It was the phase of the cycle she had learned to dread most, because it was the prologue to inevitable deterioration. The calm before the pattern reasserted itself. On a Thursday evening, Elena was grading papers at the kitchen table when David came home early from his job at the distribution center. She knew immediately that something was wrong. He carried tension in his shoulders like armor, and his jaw was set in the particular way that preceded violence. "Hey," she kept her voice light, neutral, offering no friction for his anger to catch on. "Hey." He dropped his keys on the counter with more force than necessary. "We need to talk." 4 words. Innocuous in most contexts, lethal in theirs. Elena set down her pen. "Okay. I got written up today, 3rd time this month." He paced the small kitchen like a caged animal. "My supervisor is on my ass about everything, every tiny mistake. It's like he's looking for reasons to fire me." "I'm sorry, that's really stressful." "Stressful?" He turned on her, and she saw the shift happen in real time, saw the reasonable man dissolve into the thing underneath. "You have no idea what stress is. You play with children all day while I'm breaking my back to keep a roof over our heads." "I know, you work really hard." "Don't patronize me, Elena." She hadn't been, but explaining that would only make things worse. So she said nothing, which also made things worse, because silence could be interpreted as judgment, as disrespect, as any number of offenses that existed only in his perception. "You know what your problem is?" He moved closer, and she forced herself not to flinch. "You think you're better than me. College degree, teaching job, all those books you read. But you're not better. You're nothing without me." The words were familiar. Variations on a theme he had been developing for 3 years. Elena had learned that the best response was agreement, capitulation, the erasure of self that he required. "You're right, I'm sorry." But tonight, something in her apology enraged rather than placated him. Perhaps her tone was wrong. Perhaps she had taken too long to respond. Perhaps the mere fact of her existence was offense enough. His hand closed around her injured wrist with deliberate cruelty. Elena cried out, the pain sharp and immediate, and tried to pull away. That was her mistake. Trying to escape always made it worse. What happened next had the dreamlike quality of familiar nightmare. His other hand found her throat. Not enough pressure to cut off air completely, but enough to make breathing difficult. Enough to remind her how easily he could end this if he chose. "Don't you ever pull away from me," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You don't get to decide when this conversation is over." Elena couldn't respond, could barely breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, and she thought, with the strange clarity that sometimes accompanies mortal terror, that this might be it. This might be the time he didn't stop. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. He released her and stepped back, his expression cycling through rage to confusion, to something that might have been horror if he were capable of genuine self-reflection. Elena collapsed to the floor, gasping, her wrists screaming and her throat bruised. She heard him leave, heard the apartment door slam, and then there was just silence and pain and the terrible knowledge that next time would be worse. It was always worse. She didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough for the adrenaline to fade and the shaking to start. Long enough for the sun to set and the apartment to fill with shadows. Long enough to understand that the choice she had been avoiding for 3 years could no longer be deferred. Elena pulled herself up, using the kitchen counter, and walked to the bedroom on unsteady legs. The book was still on her nightstand. The card was still between its pages. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. It rang once, twice. Yes. The voice that answered was male, unfamiliar, and utterly calm. Elena's voice broke. "I was given this number. I need help." "Are you in immediate danger?" "No, he left, but he'll come back." "What's your address?" She gave it, the words coming out in a rush. Some part of her brain screamed that this was insane, that she was giving her address to a stranger, that she should call the police instead. But she had tried the police once, in the first year, and David had been so calm, so rational, so convincing. And after the officers left, after they accepted his explanation and her forced confirmation, he had made sure she understood the cost of involving authorities. "Someone will be there in 15 minutes, the calm voice said. "Pack a bag with essentials. Don't bring anything you can't carry yourself. Do you understand?" "Yes." 15 minutes. Stay away from windows. The line went dead. Elena moved with the efficiency of someone who had imagined this moment 1,000 times but never believed it would arrive. She pulled a duffel bag from the closet and filled it with clothes, toiletries, the few documents she had managed to keep. birth certificate, social security card, teaching license. She grabbed the poetry book from her nightstand and a framed photograph of her mother, dead now 5 years, who had never known the thing Elena had become. 13 minutes after the phone call, there was a knock at the door. Elena looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in dark suits. They looked like corporate attorneys or Secret Service agents. Professional, anonymous, dangerous. She opened the door. "Elena Ward?" the taller one asked. She nodded. "We're here to relocate you. Is that your only bag?" "Yes." "Good. Let's go." They moved with practiced efficiency, flanking her as they walked to the stairs, maintaining a protective formation that made her feel simultaneously safer and more frightened. A black SUV idled at the curb, engine running. They ushered her into the back seat, and before Elena could fully process what was happening, they were moving. She looked back once at the apartment building that had been her prison and felt nothing. No relief, no fear, just a vast, hollow numbness where emotion should have been. "Where are we going?" she asked. The driver caught her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Somewhere safe. Mr. Valente will explain everything when we arrive." Marcus Valente, the man from the emergency room, the stranger who had looked at her and seen the truth she worked so hard to hide. Elena leaned back against the leather seat and closed her eyes. Somewhere behind them, David would return to an empty apartment and discover her absence. He would call her phone, which she had left on the kitchen counter, still plugged into the charger. He would rage and search and eventually realize that she had actually done it. She had left. And then he would come looking for her. Elena pushed the thought away and focused on the immediate present. The vehicle. The silent men. The fact that she had just placed her life in the hands of people she didn't know, trusting in the word of a man she had spoken to for less than 5 minutes. The drive took 40 minutes, winding through the city and then out into the suburbs, finally turning onto a private road that led to a property hidden behind walls and gates. Security cameras tracked their progress. The gate opened as they approached, closing behind them with the decisive sound of commitment. The house, calling it a house, felt insufficient. It was an estate, sprawled across manicured grounds. All modern lines and expensive materials lit from within with warm light that should have been welcoming but instead felt like entering another world entirely. The SUV stopped in front of the main entrance. The driver opened her door. "This way, please." Elena followed him into a foyer that could have swallowed her entire apartment. Marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than she made in a year, the scent of something expensive and understated. And standing in the center of it all, somehow looking both completely at home and slightly out of place, was Marcus Valente. He had changed from the hospital. Now he wore black slacks and a charcoal sweater that did nothing to hide the bulk of bandages beneath. His left arm was supported by a sling he clearly hated, but his eyes were the same, dark, assessing, missing nothing. "Ms. Ward." He dismissed the driver with a subtle gesture. "I'm glad you called." Elena clutched her duffel bag like a shield. "I don't understand what's happening." "That's fair. Come sit down. I'll explain." He led her to a living room that probably violated several fire codes with its sheer square footage. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked grounds that disappeared into darkness. Marcus gestured to a leather sofa and took the chair across from her, moving with the careful control of someone working around significant pain. "First thing," he said, "you're safe here. This property has security that makes the White House look accessible. No one gets in without authorization. No one leaves without escort. Your ex-partner doesn't know where you are and won't find out." "How can you be sure?" "Because making people disappear is one of my specialties." He said it without inflection, stating fact. "You called the number because you needed an exit. I'm providing one. No strings, no obligations, no expectations beyond basic human decency." Elena's hands twisted in her lap. "Who are you? Really?" Marcus considered the question with the same careful precision he seemed to apply to everything. "I run an organization that operates in spaces the law doesn't effectively reach. I handle problems that conventional solutions can't address. And sometimes, when I see someone trapped in a situation I recognize, I offer alternatives." "You're a criminal." "Yes." No hesitation, no euphemism. "I am. And that's relevant because it means I have resources and methods that legal channels don't. It also means you need to understand exactly what you're accepting by being here, which is protection, housing, financial support while you figure out your next steps, medical care, therapy if you want it, legal assistance to navigate whatever comes next. He paused. In exchange, I ask for discretion. What you see here, what you learn about me and my organization, stays confidential. Can you agree to that? Elena thought about David, thought about going back, thought about the alternative, which was this: safety purchased through association with admitted criminality. Yes, she said. Good. Marcus stood, moving to a cabinet and returning with a glass of water he offered to her. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll move you to a more permanent location, a secured apartment, fully furnished, utilities included. You'll have a security detail until we're certain your ex won't be a problem. How long will that take? Something flickered across Marcus's expression, there and gone too quickly to identify. That depends on him. If he's smart, he'll accept that you're gone and move on. If he's not, he let the sentence hang, incomplete. What happens if he's not smart? Then he becomes a problem I solve. Marcus returned to his chair. But let's not borrow trouble. For tonight, you're here. You're safe. Everything else, we handle as it comes. Elena sipped the water because she needed something to do with her hands. Her wrist ached, her throat ached. Everything ached in ways that were both physical and existential. Why are you doing this? She asked. For me, specifically. You don't know me. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested history. Let's just say I understand what it's like to be trapped in circumstances beyond your control. And I believe that people deserve options, even when the system fails to provide them. It wasn't a complete answer, but Elena sensed it was all she would get tonight. She was too exhausted to push, too overwhelmed to process the magnitude of what she had done. The staff will show you to your room, Marcus said, standing. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Anything you need, just ask. Thank you. The words felt inadequate for the enormity of what he was offering, but they were all she had. He nodded and left her there, disappearing into the depths of the house with the silent footsteps of someone accustomed to moving through spaces unseen. Elena sat in the expensive living room of a stranger's house, her entire life reduced to a duffel bag and a phone number that had answered when she finally found the courage to call. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if she had made the right choice or traded one form of captivity for another. But for the first time in 3 years, David didn't know where she was. Couldn't find her, couldn't hurt her. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a beginning. Elena woke to unfamiliar silence. Not the tense quiet of David's apartment, where even stillness carried the weight of potential violence, but actual peace. Sunlight filtered through curtains she didn't recognize, illuminating a room that belonged in a design magazine rather than her life. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory crashed back. The phone call, the men in suits, Marcus Valente standing in his fortress, offering her safety with the casual authority of someone accustomed to reshaping reality. She sat up slowly, cataloging the aches in her body. Her wrist throbbed beneath its splint. Her throat felt tender where David's fingers had pressed. But beneath the physical pain was something unfamiliar, the absence of dread. No footsteps in the hallway signaling his approach. No need to calculate her words, her movements, her very breathing to avoid triggering rage. A knock at the door made her tense reflexively. Ms. Ward? A woman's voice, professional and warm. I'm Sarah. Mr. Valente asked me to check if you needed anything. Elena pulled on the robe she'd found draped across the chair the night before. Come in. The woman who entered looked to be in her early 40s, with kind eyes and the efficient demeanor of someone who had seen enough of the world to be unshakable. She carried a tray with coffee, juice, and pastries that smelled like they'd been baked that morning. I didn't know what you'd want, so I brought options. Sarah set the tray on the dresser. There's a full breakfast downstairs if you prefer something more substantial. This is perfect. Thank you. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. What time is it? Just past 9. Mr. Valente said to let you sleep as long as you needed. Sarah moved to the windows, opening the curtains fully to reveal grounds that looked even more impressive in daylight. He's asked if you'd join him in his office when you're ready. No rush. After Sarah left, Elena showered in the marble bathroom, washing away the residue of yesterday with water pressure that felt like luxury. She dressed in clean clothes from her hastily packed bag and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. The house in daylight was even more imposing. She followed Sarah's directions through hallways lined with art that Elena suspected was original, past rooms whose purposes she could only guess at, until she reached a door that stood slightly ajar. Marcus's office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of space designed to conduct serious business. He sat behind a massive desk, reviewing something on a tablet, his injured arm still in its sling. He looked up when she entered and gestured to the chair across from him. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Elena admitted, settling into the chair. "Which is strange, considering. Safety tends to have that effect." He set the tablet aside, giving her his full attention. "I want to go over the next steps, make sure you understand what's happening and what your options are." Elena nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. "The apartment I mentioned is ready. It's in a secured building I own, 20 units, half of which house people who work for me. The other half are kept for situations like yours. You'll have 24-hour security, though it won't be obvious. The goal is for you to have as normal a life as possible within protected parameters. How long can I stay there?" "As long as you need. Rent is covered. So are utilities." He paused, watching her carefully. "I'm not keeping you prisoner, Elena. You're free to leave whenever you choose. But while you're under my protection, certain rules apply." "What kind of rules?" "You don't discuss my business with anyone. You don't bring unauthorized people to the apartment. And if you're planning to go somewhere outside your normal routine, you clear it with security first." His tone was matter-of-fact, outlining protocols rather than restrictions. "These aren't about controlling you. They're about keeping you safe and keeping my operation secure." "What about work? I teach. You can continue teaching if you want, though I'd suggest taking at least a week to settle in, let the immediate situation stabilize." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Your ex-partner. Tell me about him." Elena's throat tightened. "His name is David Kerr. He works at a distribution center in the industrial district. We've been together 3 years. She struggled for words that could contain the complexity. "He's not always violent. Sometimes he's kind, apologetic, but it always comes back, and each time it's worse." "Has he ever tried to find you when you've left before?" "I never really left. Just stayed with a friend once for 2 days. He showed up at her apartment, convinced me to come back." The memory tasted bitter. "I believed him when he said it would be different." Marcus's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he understood the particular hell of cyclical abuse. "Does he have family, friends who might help him look for you?" "A brother in Ohio, a few drinking buddies, but he's not close to anyone, really. He's—" Elena searched for the right description. "He's possessive, isolating. He didn't like me having friends, so eventually I stopped trying." "Good. That makes this simpler." Marcus made a note on his tablet. "My people are monitoring his activity. If he tries to find you, we'll know. If he becomes a persistent problem, we'll handle it." "Handle it how?" "That depends on him." Marcus met her gaze directly. "I'm not going to lie to you, Elena. The methods I have available aren't legal, but they're effective. If it comes to that, I'll give you a choice in how we proceed. This is your life. You get to decide how much intervention you want." The casual acknowledgement of illegal methods should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt a strange sense of relief. No empty promises that the system would protect her. No assurances that restraining orders and police reports would keep her safe. Just honest recognition that sometimes safety required operating outside conventional boundaries. "Okay," she said quietly. "There's something else we need to discuss." Marcus's tone shifted, became more serious. "Last night, when you called, you stepped into my world. That comes with certain realities you need to understand. You're involved in organized crime." "Yes. I run an organization that handles everything from logistics and security to investments and acquisitions. Some of it's legal. Much of it isn't. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know exactly who you're accepting help from." Elena studied him across the desk. He didn't look like a criminal, at least not like the ones she'd seen on television. But then again, she supposed the truly dangerous ones never did. "Why did you help me?" "Really?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested old scars. When I was 14, I watched my mother die because she couldn't escape the man who was killing her in increments. I was too young to help her, too powerless. He refocused on Elena. I'm not powerless anymore. So when I see someone trapped the way she was, I offer what I can. It doesn't fix what happened to her, but it means something. The raw honesty of it struck Elena silent. She had expected calculation, strategy, perhaps some ulterior motive. Instead, she found shared trauma and the strange redemption of turning old helplessness into current action. I'm sorry, she said. About your mother. So am I. Marcus stood, moving to the window with careful movements that favored his injured shoulder. The apartment is ready whenever you want to move in. Today, tomorrow, whenever you're comfortable. Today, Elena decided. The sooner I start figuring out what comes next, the better. Marcus nodded, something like approval in his expression. I'll have everything arranged. 2 hours later, Elena found herself in a different vehicle with a different driver, headed toward what would become her new home. The building was in a neighborhood she recognized. Decent area, close to the university, the kind of place where young professionals lived. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that would draw attention. The apartment itself was on the 4th floor. A spacious one-bedroom with modern finishes and furniture that managed to be both expensive and comfortable. Someone had stocked the kitchen with groceries, the bathroom with toiletries, the closet with basic clothing in her size. The security office is in the basement, the driver explained, handing her a key card. This gives you access to the building and your apartment. There's a panic button by the bed and another in the bathroom. Press either one and someone will be here in under 3 minutes. Elena walked through the space, running her fingers along the kitchen counter, the soft fabric of the sofa, the books someone had arranged on the shelf by the window. It felt like playing house in someone else's life. Thank you, she said to the driver, whose name she still didn't know. He nodded and left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like finality. Alone in the quiet apartment, Elena sat on the sofa and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been trapped in David's apartment, believing she had no options. Today, she was sitting in a safe space, protected by criminals, trying to figure out who she was without fear as her constant companion. Her phone, the new one Marcus's people had given her that morning, untraceable and secure, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you need anything, call this number. Marcus. Elena saved the contact and set the phone aside. Then she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She cried. Not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being somewhere David couldn't reach. The tears came in waves, purging something toxic she'd been carrying for too long. When the crying finally stopped, she felt hollowed out, but somehow lighter. She made herself tea in the unfamiliar kitchen, wrapped herself in a blanket from the linen closet, and sat by the window watching the city move below. The week that followed existed outside normal time. Elena didn't go to work. She called in sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her body needed to heal. So did everything else. She met with a doctor Marcus sent, a woman who examined her wrist and her throat and didn't ask questions about how she'd been injured because she already knew. The doctor prescribed physical therapy for the wrist and recommended a therapist who specialized in trauma. It's not mandatory, the doctor said, writing out contact information on a prescription pad. But it helps. What you've been through, it leaves marks that aren't visible. This person can help you process that. Elena took the number and promised to think about it. Marcus checked in every few days, always brief, always professional. He never came to the apartment, just called or texted to make sure she had everything she needed. Elena appreciated the distance. She needed space to breathe, to exist without the constant weight of someone else's presence. On the 5th day, she ventured out alone for the first time, just to the coffee shop 2 blocks away, but it felt monumental. She ordered a latte and sat by the window, watching people pass, and tried to remember what normal felt like. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but not the one she'd saved for Marcus. Her hand trembled as she answered. Hello? Elena. David's voice hit her like ice water. Where the hell are you? Every muscle in her body locked. The coffee shop suddenly felt too open, too exposed. I left, David. I'm not coming back. The fuck you're not. You think you can just walk out after everything I've done for you? Everything you've done to me, you mean? Watch your mouth. His voice dropped to that dangerous register she knew too well. I know you're scared. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Just tell me where you are. We'll talk it through. No. Elena, I said no. Don't call this number again. Don't try to find me. It's over. She hung up before he could respond and immediately called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. What happened? He called. I don't know how he got this number. Stay where you are. Send me your location. Someone will be there in 5 minutes. Elena's hand shook as she shared her GPS coordinates. She kept her eyes on the door, half expecting David to walk through it. 4 minutes later, a man in a dark jacket entered the coffee shop, scanned the room, and made eye contact with her. Miss Ward, I'm here to take you home. The ride back to the apartment was silent. Once inside, Elena locked the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. Marcus called within the hour. The phone's been traced. He got the number from your school, called pretending to be a family emergency, convinced the secretary to give him your new contact information. His voice was calm, but she heard the edge beneath it. That line is now dead. You'll have a new number within the hour, and I'm having a conversation with your ex about boundaries. What kind of conversation? The kind that makes consequences very clear. He paused. Elena, I need you to be honest with me. How persistent is he going to be? She thought about David's voice on the phone, the rage beneath his reasonable tone, the possessiveness that had slowly strangled her autonomy over 3 years. Very, she admitted. He doesn't let go of things, of people. He'll see this as a challenge. Then we need to be proactive. Marcus's tone shifted to something harder. I'm sending additional security to your building, and I'm going to make sure he understands that you're not available to him anymore. That might involve methods that make you uncomfortable. I need to know if you can live with that. Elena closed her eyes, thinking about David's hands around her throat, about the pattern that would never break on its own, about the choice between clean hands and actual safety. Do what you need to do, she said. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what making consequences clear actually meant, wondering if she'd just given permission for violence in her name, wondering if that made her complicit or just desperate. At 2 a.m, her new phone buzzed. It's handled. He won't bother you again. Marcus. 6 words that could mean anything. Elena stared at the message, then deleted it and tried to convince herself she didn't want to know the details. She must have eventually slept, because she woke to morning light and the sound of her phone ringing. The school principal asking when she'd be ready to return to work. Monday, Elena decided. I'll be back Monday. Returning to Jefferson Elementary felt like stepping back into a previous life. Her classroom looked exactly as she'd left it. Student artwork on the walls, books organized by reading level, the small chaos of 7-year-olds frozen in her absence. Her colleagues welcomed her back with careful warmth, asking about her wrist without asking about her wrist. Elena deflected with practiced ease and threw herself into lesson plans with the focus of someone using work to avoid thinking. At lunch, her friend Melissa cornered her in the teacher's lounge. Okay, what's really going on? You disappear for a week, you've got a wrist splint and shadows under your eyes, and you're living somewhere new. Talk to me. Elena poured coffee she didn't want, buying time. Melissa was her closest friend at the school, one of the few people who had persistently remained kind even when Elena had pulled away under David's influence. I left him, she said quietly. David, I left, and I'm not going back. Melissa's face cycled through surprise, relief, and concern. Thank God. I've been worried about you for months. Where are you staying? Are you safe? I'm safe. I have help. Elena couldn't explain the nature of that help, couldn't tell Melissa that she was living in an apartment owned by a crime boss who had made her abusive ex understand consequences. So she just smiled and said, I'm figuring it out. The day passed in the comforting routine of teaching, spelling tests and math worksheets, and the delightful chaos of second graders who still believed the world was fundamentally good. Elena let herself sink into it, grateful for the normalcy. After school, as she was packing up her classroom, her principal stopped by. Elena, there was a man here earlier asking about you, said he was your boyfriend. Ice flooded her veins. What did you tell him? Nothing. I said I couldn't discuss staff information with unauthorized individuals. The principal's expression was kind but firm. He seemed angry. I wanted you to know in case, well, in case it's relevant. Thank you. Elena's hands trembled as she gathered her things. If he comes back, please call security. She texted Marcus from her car. David showed up at my school. The response came immediately. On my way. Don't go to the apartment. Go to the address I'm sending you. A location dropped into her messages, a restaurant in the downtown area, upscale and public. Elena drove there on autopilot, her mind racing. David had come to her school, had asked about her, was escalating exactly as she'd feared. Marcus was already at the restaurant when she arrived, seated in a private corner booth with sightlines to the entrance. He stood when she approached, his injured arm no longer in a sling, but still moving carefully. Sit. He gestured to the seat across from him. You're going to eat something, and we're going to discuss next steps. He came to my school, Marcus. He's not stopping. No, he's not. Marcus signaled the waiter, ordered for both of them without consulting the menu, then refocused on Elena. Which means we have a choice to make. We can continue managing him reactively, or we can resolve the situation permanently. The way he said permanently carried implications Elena wasn't sure she wanted to examine. What does that mean? It means making sure he's no longer in a position to threaten you. There are several ways to accomplish that, ranging from legal intervention to... He paused, choosing words carefully. More definitive solutions. Elena's stomach twisted. You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about ensuring your safety by whatever means necessary. Marcus held her gaze steadily. I won't do anything without your explicit consent, but you need to understand that some problems can't be solved with restraining orders and stern warnings. Sometimes, eliminating the threat is the only permanent solution. The waiter arrived with wine Elena didn't remember Marcus ordering. She took a long sip, using the moment to think. I don't want him dead, she said finally. I just want him gone. Those might not be compatible goals. If he's alive, he's a potential threat. Then make him afraid enough that he stops being a threat. Elena set down her wine glass with more force than intended. You said you had resources. Use them. Make him understand that coming after me will cost him more than I'm worth. But don't kill him, not for me. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we'll do it your way. But Elena, if this doesn't work, if he continues to escalate, you need to be prepared for harder choices. I understand. Their food arrived, steak and asparagus for both, cooked to perfection. Elena picked at it mechanically, her appetite gone, but her body needing fuel. Marcus ate with the same controlled precision he applied to everything, and Elena realized this was probably the first time they'd shared a meal, despite him having completely restructured her life. Tell me something, she said, setting down her fork. This thing you do, helping people escape bad situations. How many others are there? Currently, 4 women, 1 teenage runaway, and 2 men fleeing gang situations. Over the years? Considered. Maybe 30. Some stayed in my protection long term. Others used it as a bridge to rebuild their lives elsewhere. And you just do this? Out of guilt over your mother? Guilt. Principle. The recognition that I have power most people don't, and that power should serve some purpose beyond accumulation. He met her eyes. I'm not a good man, Elena. I've done things that would horrify you. But I can still choose where to direct the resources I've built through those questionable methods. This is one of those choices. Elena absorbed that, trying to reconcile the man across from her with the criminal he claimed to be. He looked like someone who could run a corporation or a country, contained violence wrapped in expensive clothing and careful control. What happened to your shoulder? She asked. The gunshot. You never said. Business disagreement that got out of hand. The other party learned why that was a mistake. He said it casually, discussing violence the way other people discuss traffic. It's healing well, should be fully functional in another few weeks. They finished the meal in companionable silence. When the check came, Marcus paid with a black card that suggested unlimited resources, then stood and offered Elena his hand. I'll have someone drive you home. And Elena, starting tomorrow, you'll have a visible security presence. Someone who stays close when you're at school makes it clear you're protected. It might feel intrusive, but it will also send a message. To David. To anyone who might think you're vulnerable. Elena let him help her into her coat, the gesture oddly gentlemanly from someone who'd just offered to kill her ex-boyfriend. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic and the particular energy of people rushing toward their lives. A car pulled up, different from the one that had brought her, but the same anonymous luxury. Marcus opened the door for her. "Thank you," Elena said, "for all of this. I know I keep saying that, but you don't need to thank me. Just stay safe and call if anything changes." The ride home gave Elena time to think about David showing up at her school, about Marcus's offer of permanent solutions, about the strange new reality where safety came with bodyguards and criminal protection. The apartment felt like sanctuary when she finally locked herself inside. She changed into comfortable clothes, made chamomile tea, and sat by the window watching the city lights. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. "Your security detail starts at 7 a.m. tomorrow. His name is James, former military, current employee, completely trustworthy. He'll meet you at your building." Elena typed back, "Okay." Then, after a pause, "What did you say to David when you made consequences clear?" The response took longer than usual. "I explained that you were under my protection. I detailed exactly what would happen if he continued to pursue you. I made sure he understood that I have resources he can't imagine and reach he can't escape. And I introduced him to someone who made the abstract very concrete." Elena stared at the message, simultaneously grateful and unsettled. She didn't ask for details, didn't want to know what made the abstract very concrete actually meant. "Did it work?" she typed. "We'll know in the next few days. But Elena, be prepared for the possibility that it didn't. Some men see warnings as challenges." She went to bed that night with the panic button within reach and her new phone charging on the nightstand. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by dreams where David's hands found her throat and Marcus's dark eyes watched from shadows. Morning arrived with pale winter sun and the realization that she'd survived another night of freedom. Elena dressed for school, chose clothing that felt like armor, and was waiting in the lobby when James arrived at exactly 7. He was perhaps 40, with the kind of calm competence that suggested extensive training and experience. He extended his hand. "Ms. Ward, I'll be accompanying you today. I'll stay back, give you space to work, but I'll be present. If anyone approaches you who makes you uncomfortable, just give me a signal and I'll handle it." "What kind of signal?" "Touch your left ear, that's all. I'll do the rest." Having James shadow her felt strange at first. He stayed 15 feet back, always visible but never intrusive. The other teachers noticed but didn't comment, and Elena realized Marcus's security probably wasn't as unusual as she'd thought in this neighborhood. The day passed without incident. No David, no unexpected visitors, just the normal rhythm of teaching and the comforting presence of someone whose entire job was keeping her safe. At lunch, Melissa pulled her aside again. "Okay, who's the hot bodyguard?" Elena couldn't help but laugh, the first genuine laughter she'd felt in days. "It's complicated. Everything about your life has gotten complicated in the last 2 weeks." Melissa studied her carefully. "But you look better, lighter, somehow. So whatever's happening, I'm glad you're out of that situation with David." "Me too." That night, Elena did something she'd been avoiding. She called the therapist the doctor had recommended. The woman who answered had a voice like warm honey. "This is Dr. Chen." "Hi, I was given your number by Dr. Morrison. She said you specialize in trauma therapy." "I do. Are you looking to schedule an initial consultation?" "Yes." Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "I think I need help processing some things." They set up an appointment for the following week. After hanging up, Elena felt something unfamiliar. Not quite hope, but maybe its distant cousin. The possibility that she could heal from this, that she could become someone who didn't carry fear in her bones. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Elena Ward?" A woman's voice, official and clipped. "Yes?" "This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the city police. I'm calling about David Kerr. We have him in custody for questioning regarding an assault incident. I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with him." Elena's world tilted. "What happened?" "He attacked a man outside a bar last night, put him in the hospital. During questioning, he mentioned you several times, said someone was keeping you from him. I need to understand the context. Elena closed her eyes, her mind racing. David in custody, David talking about her, David violent enough to put someone in the hospital. He's my ex-boyfriend. I left him 2 weeks ago because he was abusive. I'm happy to give a statement about that. We'd appreciate it. Can you come to the station tomorrow? Yes, I'll be there. After ending the call, Elena immediately texted Marcus. David attacked someone. Police have him in custody and want to talk to me. The response was instant. Don't go alone. I'm sending a lawyer to meet you at the station. His name is Mitchell Reeves. Trust him completely. Elena sat in the dark apartment processing this new development. David in jail. David violent with someone else. David spiraling in exactly the way she'd feared. And somehow, despite everything, she felt guilty. Because if she had never left, if she had just endured, maybe that man wouldn't be in the hospital. Her phone rang again. Marcus this time. Stop, he said without preamble. Stop what? Whatever you're thinking right now, whatever guilt you're attaching to yourself for his actions. Stop. How did you know? Because I know the pattern. You spent 3 years being told his violence was your responsibility. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. David's choices are his own. The man he hurt, that's on David, not you. Elena's throat tightened with emotion. It's hard not to feel responsible. I know, but you're going to practice anyway. Every time that guilt rises, you're going to remind yourself that you are not accountable for the violence of others. Say it. I'm not accountable for the violence of others. Again. I'm not accountable for the violence of others. Good. Keep saying it until you believe it. His voice softened slightly. Mitchell will meet you at the station at 10 tomorrow morning. Tell the detective everything. Don't minimize, don't protect him. Just tell the truth. Okay? And Elena, this might actually solve our problem. If he's charged with assault, he'll be too busy dealing with that to focus on you. After they hung up, Elena sat in the quiet apartment and let herself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, she'd been trapped. Now she was free but tangled in the complicated web of criminal protection, police investigations, and the slow work of healing. It wasn't the clean escape she'd imagined, but it was hers, and for now, that was enough. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and institutional despair. Elena sat in the waiting area with Mitchell Reeves, the lawyer Marcus had sent, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Mitchell was in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of tailored suit that announced competence and expense. He had arrived at her apartment that morning with coffee and calm assurance. Just tell the truth, he'd said during the drive. Answer their questions directly. Don't volunteer information they don't ask for. And if anything makes you uncomfortable, I'll intervene. Now, watching uniformed officers move through the station with practiced efficiency, Elena wondered what truth she was supposed to tell. The sanitized version that kept her shame private? Or the raw reality of 3 years spent learning to navigate David's violence? Ms. Ward. Detective Morrison emerged from a hallway, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen too much. Thank you for coming in. Let's talk in here. The interview room was exactly like the ones on television, sparse, deliberately uncomfortable, designed to make people want to talk just to fill the oppressive silence. Elena sat across from the detective with Mitchell beside her, his presence a reminder that she wasn't alone in this. For the record, Detective Morrison began, setting a recorder on the table, this is Detective Sarah Morrison interviewing Elena Ward regarding David Kerr. Ms. Ward, can you describe your relationship with Mr. Kerr? Elena took a breath and started talking. She told the detective about meeting David 4 years ago, about the slow erosion of boundaries that she'd mistaken for love. She described the first time he'd hit her, 8 months into their relationship, after a fight about her staying late to help a colleague. How he'd cried afterward, promised it would never happen again, and how she'd believed him because she needed to. How many times did he physically assault you? The detective asked. I stopped counting after the first year, dozens maybe. It escalated over time. Did you ever report it? Once. 2 years ago. The officers who responded were kind, but David was calm when they arrived. Reasonable. He convinced them I was exaggerating, that we'd just had an argument. After they left, Elena's voice trailed off. What happened after they left? He made sure I understood that calling the police again would have consequences. So I didn't. Mitchell's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of support that steadied her. Detective Morrison's expression remained professional, but something in her eyes suggested she'd heard variations of this story too many times. When did you leave the relationship? 2 weeks ago, after he choked me. I realized that if I stayed, he would eventually kill me. Where are you living now? Mitchell intervened smoothly. My client is in a secure location. For her safety, we're not disclosing the address. The detective nodded, making notes. Mr. Kerr attacked a man named Thomas Rivera outside a bar on Thursday night, put him in the hospital with a fractured skull and broken ribs. During questioning, Mr. Kerr claimed that Rivera was connected to people who are keeping you from him. Do you know anyone named Thomas Rivera? Elena shook her head. No, I've never heard that name. Do you know anyone who might have intervened on your behalf? Someone who might have warned Mr. Kerr to stay away from you? The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. Elena felt Mitchell tense beside her, but his expression remained neutral. I have friends who were concerned about my situation, Elena said carefully, but I don't know anything about anyone confronting David. It wasn't quite a lie. She didn't know the details of what Marcus had done. Didn't know if Thomas Rivera worked for him or was just collateral damage in David's spiral. Detective Morrison studied her for a long moment. Miss Ward, I'm going to be direct with you. Your ex-boyfriend is claiming that you're being held against your will by some kind of criminal organization, that they've threatened him and are preventing you from contacting him. Is any of that true? No. I left David because he was hurting me. No one is holding me anywhere. I'm exactly where I choose to be. And these friends who were concerned, they haven't done anything illegal on your behalf? Mitchell leaned forward. Detective, my client has answered your questions about her relationship with Mr. Kerr. If you're investigating other matters, she's not in a position to help you. She left an abusive situation. That's the extent of her involvement. The detective sighed, closing her notebook. All right, Miss Ward, I appreciate your cooperation. We're charging Mr. Kerr with aggravated assault. Given his statements and your testimony about the domestic violence, we're also going to recommend he be held without bail pending trial. Do you want to pursue charges for the abuse you documented? Elena looked at Mitchell, who nodded slightly. Yes, she said. I want to press charges. Good. I'll have the domestic violence unit reach out to you. They'll need additional statements and evidence. Detective Morrison stood, extending her hand. I'm sorry for what you went through, and Ms. Ward, whoever these friends are who are looking out for you, be careful. Sometimes the line between protection and control gets blurry. Outside the station, Elena leaned against Mitchell's car and tried to process what had just happened. David was in custody. David had attacked someone because of his paranoia about her leaving. David was spiraling, and she couldn't decide if she felt relief or horror. That went well, Mitchell said, unlocking the car. You handled yourself perfectly. Did Marcus send someone to talk to David? Is that what set this off? Mitchell's expression became carefully neutral. I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Valente's business operations. What I can tell you is that David Kerr made his own choices. He chose violence. He's facing the consequences. The man he hurt, Thomas Rivera. Does he work for Marcus? Ms. Ward, some questions are better left unasked, for your own protection and everyone else's. Mitchell opened the passenger door for her. Let's get you home. The drive back to the apartment gave Elena time to think. She had just given the police a detailed account of 3 years of abuse, had pressed charges that might put David in prison, had taken a stand she'd been too terrified to take when it might have mattered most. And somewhere in the shadows of her new life, Marcus was orchestrating interventions she couldn't see, solving problems with methods she couldn't ask about, protecting her in ways that blurred every line she'd once believed was clear. Back at the apartment, she found a note slipped under her door. Marcus's handwriting, distinctive and precise. The situation is evolving. We need to talk. I'll call tonight. Elena set the note aside and tried to return to some semblance of normal routine. She graded papers from her students, prepared lesson plans for the following week, made herself eat lunch even though her appetite had vanished. James was stationed in the hallway, a silent presence that should have felt intrusive but instead brought comfort. At 7 that evening, her phone rang. "How did it go with the detective?" Marcus asked without preamble. "I told her everything. About David, about the abuse. I pressed charges." Elena curled up on her sofa, the phone pressed to her ear. She asked if anyone had intervened on my behalf, asked about criminal organizations. "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know anything, which is technically true. You've never told me details." "Good. Keep it that way." Marcus's voice carried strain she hadn't heard before. "Elena, we have a problem. The man David attacked, Thomas Rivera, he does work for me. He was doing surveillance, making sure David understood the boundaries. David figured it out and went after him." Elena's stomach dropped. "Is Thomas okay?" "He'll recover. But this complicates things. David's made a connection between you and my organization. That makes you a potential liability in ways I didn't anticipate." "What does that mean?" "It means people who have issues with me might see you as leverage. It means your protection needs to be even tighter. And it means—" He paused, and Elena heard something that might have been frustration. "It means I made a mistake. I thought I could help you without pulling you into my world. I was wrong." "So what now?" "Now we adapt. You continue your life as normally as possible. But Elena, you need to understand something. There are people in this city who would use you to get to me if they knew you were under my protection. That's the price of accepting help from someone like me." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choices that had seemed so clear 2 weeks ago become murky and complicated. "Are you saying I should leave? Find protection somewhere else?" "No. I'm saying you need to be aware of the full picture, and you need to decide if you're comfortable with it." His voice softened slightly. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to be honest about the reality you've stepped into." "I appreciate that." Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Marcus, who are these people who might come after me? What exactly do you do that makes you a target?" The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not answer. "I run one of the largest criminal organizations in the state," he finally said. "We handle logistics for legitimate businesses and illegal operations. We control territory, manage conflicts, and ensure that certain enterprises can operate without interference from law enforcement or rival groups. That makes me valuable to some people and dangerous to others. The ones who see me as dangerous, they'd exploit any weakness they could find. And I'm a weakness now. You're a person under my protection who's been publicly connected to my organization through David's accusations. That changes the calculus." He paused. "I have enemies, Elena. Real ones. People who wouldn't hesitate to use you as a pawn if the opportunity presented itself." Elena absorbed that, trying to reconcile her quiet life as an elementary school teacher with the dangerous world she'd inadvertently entered. "So what do? We keep you safe. Increased security, modified routines, better awareness of your surroundings, and we prepare for the possibility that David's paranoia might have painted a target on your back without meaning to." "He's in jail. Doesn't that solve the problem?" "Only the immediate one, but his lawyer will argue he's unstable, that he was responding to legitimate threats against someone he cared about. The assault charge might stick, but it might not. And even if it does, he's made noise about my organization. That noise attracts attention we don't want." Elena felt the walls closing in, the freedom she'd found 2 weeks ago suddenly hemmed by new dangers she hadn't anticipated. "I'm sorry. This is all because I called that number." "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "This is because David is a violent man who couldn't accept your autonomy. You made the right call. The complications are on me for underestimating how he'd react to intervention." They talked for another 20 minutes, with Marcus outlining new security protocols and modified routines. Elena listened, taking notes, trying to focus on practical details instead of the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. After hanging up, she sat in the dark apartment and wondered if she'd traded one form of captivity for another. David's violence had been immediate, visceral, personal. But this new threat, shadowy enemies who might use her as leverage against a man she barely knew, felt more insidious precisely because it was abstract. Her phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Drinks Friday? You look like you could use a friend." Elena typed back. "Yes, definitely yes. The next few days passed in tense normalcy. Elena taught her classes with James maintaining his discreet distance. She met with the domestic violence unit, gave additional statements, looked at photographs of her own bruises that had been documented at the hospital 2 weeks ago. The detective handling her case was kind, efficient, and promised to keep her updated on the prosecution. David remained in custody, denied bail due to the severity of the assault and his documented history of domestic violence. Elena should have felt relief. Instead, she felt like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Friday evening, she met Melissa at a wine bar near the university. James waited at the bar, far enough to give them privacy, but close enough to intervene if needed. "Okay," Melissa said, pouring them both generous glasses of Pinot Noir. "I've been patient, but you need to tell me what's actually going on. You've got a bodyguard, you're living in a new apartment, and you look like you're waiting for something terrible to happen." Elena took a long sip of wine and decided Melissa deserved at least a version of the truth. "I left David, like I said, but it got complicated. He became dangerous. Not just to me, but to other people. So someone stepped in to help. That someone has resources that come with their own complications." "Resources like professional security?" "Among other things." Melissa studied her carefully. "Is this person trustworthy? Are you safe with them?" "I think so. He's been nothing but honest about what he can and can't do. But the world he operates in, it's not simple. There are risks I didn't fully understand when I accepted help." "So it's a man." "Yes, but it's not like that. He's helping me because he can, not because he wants something from me." Melissa's expression suggested skepticism, but she didn't push. "Just promise me you'll be careful. And if you need anything at all, you call me. Understood?" "Understood." They spent the rest of the evening talking about safer topics, the challenges of teaching second grade, Melissa's disaster of a dating life, the upcoming school fundraiser. Normal conversation that made Elena feel anchored to the person she'd been before David, before Marcus, before her life became something unrecognizable. Walking back to her apartment later, with James a silent shadow behind her, Elena felt almost peaceful. The wine had softened her edges, and the evening with Melissa had reminded her that she still had connections to a world outside the complicated web she'd found herself in. That peace shattered 3 steps from her building entrance. A car pulled up to the curb, moving too fast, and men emerged before Elena could process what was happening. 3 of them, moving with coordinated precision. James reacted instantly, stepping between Elena and the threat, but one of the men was faster. The impact of something hard against the back of her head sent Elena to her knees. She heard James shout, heard the sound of a struggle, and then hands were dragging her toward the open car door. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but everything was spinning and someone's hand was clamped over her mouth. The last thing she saw before they shoved a hood over her head was James on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Then darkness. Elena woke to complete disorientation. Her head throbbed where she'd been hit, and her hands were bound behind her back. The hood was still over her head, rough fabric that made breathing difficult. She could hear voices, muffled and indistinct, somewhere beyond her immediate space. "She's awake." A man's voice, cold and professional. The hood was yanked off, and harsh light made Elena's eyes water. She was in what looked like a warehouse, concrete floors, high ceilings, the kind of abandoned industrial space that cities were full of. 3 men stood watching her, all of them armed. The one who'd spoken stepped closer. He was in his 40s, with the kind of face that suggested violence was a professional tool rather than a personal failing. "Elena Ward, Marcus Valente's latest project." He crouched down to her eye level. "Do you know why you're here?" Elena's mind raced, adrenaline cutting through the fog of pain and fear. She thought about James bleeding on the sidewalk, thought about Marcus's warning that she might be used as leverage, thought about every crime show she'd ever seen and the statistical likelihood that people who were kidnapped and moved to secondary locations didn't survive. "No," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your leverage. Valente has something we want. He's going to give it to us in exchange for you." The man stood, pulling out a phone. "Let's make the call." He stepped away, speaking too quietly for Elena to hear. She used the moment to assess her situation. Hands bound behind her back, zip-tied by the feel of it. 3 armed men that she could see, possibly more she couldn't. No windows visible, just industrial doors that probably led to more warehouse space. Her only advantage was that they wanted her alive, at least for now. The man returned, holding his phone toward her. "Say hello." "Elena." Marcus's voice came through the speaker, tightly controlled but carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "Are you hurt?" "My head. They hit me, but I'm okay." She tried to keep her voice calm, tried not to let the terror seep through. "James is in surgery. He'll survive." Marcus's tone shifted, became harder. "Let me talk to whoever's in charge there." The man took the phone back. "Valente, here's how this works. You have something that belongs to our organization, shipment records, financial documentation, enough to cause us significant problems. You're going to turn over every copy you have. In exchange, we give you back your teacher. And if I don't?" Then she becomes a lesson in why you don't interfere with our business. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You have 6 hours. We'll send you a location for the exchange. Come alone, come clean, or she dies." He ended the call and pocketed the phone. Then he looked at Elena with something that might have been pity. "For what it's worth, this isn't personal. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Story of my life," Elena said, surprised by her own bitter laugh. The men left her alone after that, moving to the far end of the warehouse to talk in low voices. Elena tested the zip ties binding her wrists, but they were professional grade and tight. She wasn't getting out of them without help or tools. 6 hours. She had 6 hours to either be rescued or become a casualty in a war between criminals she knew nothing about. Time moved strangely in the warehouse. Elena counted her breaths, trying to stay calm, trying not to think about all the ways this could end badly. She thought about her students, about the lesson plans she'd never finish if she didn't survive this. Thought about Melissa, who would blame herself for suggesting they go out. Thought about Marcus, who had tried to protect her and inadvertently made her a target. Thought about David, rotting in a jail cell, and the dark irony that she'd escaped his violence only to face a different kind entirely. After what felt like hours but was probably less, the warehouse door opened and more men entered. These ones looked different, harder, more dangerous. The one who'd made the call approached them with obvious deference. "Any word?" "He's coming. Confirm the exchange location." The new arrival looked at Elena with cold assessment. "This her?" "Yeah, teacher." Valente pulled her out of a domestic situation, got her set up in one of his protected buildings. "Sentimental bastard." The man walked closer to Elena, studying her like she was livestock. "I hope you're worth whatever he's about to give up for you." "I'm not worth anything," Elena said quietly. "I'm just someone he helped. He barely knows me." "Then he's an idiot for trading valuable intelligence for a nobody." The man turned away, dismissing her. "Keep her comfortable. We don't want her damaged before the exchange." Comfortable was relative. They gave her water, loosened the zip ties enough that her hands wouldn't go numb, and removed the chair they'd tied her to so she could at least sit on the floor. But they didn't untie her, didn't give her any opportunity to escape. Elena leaned against the wall and tried to think. Marcus was coming. Would trade whatever these people wanted for her safe return. Would put himself at risk because she'd called a number 2 weeks ago and pulled him into her nightmare. She thought about Detective Morrison's warning. Sometimes the line between protection and control gets blurry, but this didn't feel like control. This felt like someone choosing her safety over strategic advantage, and Elena didn't know how to process that kind of sacrifice. More time passed. The men checked their weapons, coordinated over phones, moved with the efficiency of people executing a well-planned operation. Elena watched them and tried to memorize details in case she survived long enough to matter as a witness. Finally, one of the men's phones rang. He answered, listened, then looked at Elena. "Valente's early. Time to move." They hauled her to her feet and zip-tied her hands again, tighter this time. Then they marched her through the warehouse to a loading dock where 2 vehicles waited. They put her in the back of an SUV, flanked by armed men, and drove through the city in silence. Elena watched the streets pass through tinted windows, trying to track their route. She recognized the industrial district, then the warehouse areas near the port, places where violence could happen without witnesses. The SUV finally stopped in a vast, empty parking lot. In the distance, Elena could see another vehicle, lights on, waiting. "Here's how this works," the man who'd made the phone call said, turning to face her from the front seat. "We walk you out to the middle. Valente brings what we want. We verify it's legitimate. Then we trade. Simple. And if he doesn't have what you want, then this gets messy." He opened his door. "Let's hope he's smarter than that." They pulled Elena from the vehicle and walked her across the empty parking lot. She could see Marcus now, standing alone beside his car, holding what looked like a briefcase. Even from a distance, she could read the tension in his posture, the barely controlled violence in the way he held himself. 50 feet separated them when both groups stopped. "Valente," the leader called. "You alone?" "As requested." "Where's Elena?" "Right here. Safe and sound." He gestured, and one of his men pushed Elena forward slightly. "The documentation?" Marcus held up the briefcase. "Everything you asked for. Financial records, shipping manifests, communications. Enough to bury you if it gets out, which is why I kept copies." "Of course you did." The man smiled. "Which is why you're going to hand over every single copy, physical and digital. Or this doesn't end well for anyone. I'll give you the physical copies now. The digital ones get deleted once Elena is back safely. You'll just have to trust me on that." "Trust." The word carried mockery. "That's rich coming from you. Do we have a deal or not?" The leader considered, then nodded. "We trade on 3. You walk forward, we walk forward. Midpoint exchange." Marcus started moving before he finished the sentence, crossing the space with controlled urgency. The man holding Elena matched his pace, and suddenly she was close enough to see the barely concealed fear in Marcus's eyes. Their captors shoved her toward Marcus as he handed over the briefcase. For one brief moment, his hand gripped her arm, steadying her. "I've got you," he said quietly. Then someone was cutting the zip ties on her wrists, and she was free. Marcus pulled her behind him, putting himself between her and the men who'd taken her. "The digital copies," the leader said, opening the briefcase and rifling through its contents. "When?" "As soon as I verify Elena hasn't been harmed and we're safely away from here. You have my word." "Your word." The man laughed. "All right, Valente, your word it is. But if those files aren't deleted within the hour, or if I find out you kept copies, this whole city becomes a war zone. Understood?" "Understood." Marcus backed toward his car, keeping Elena behind him, his eyes never leaving the men who'd taken her. They watched with weapons ready, but not raised, a temporary truce built on mutual interest and minimal trust. "Get in the car," Marcus said to Elena, without looking at her. She obeyed, sliding into the passenger seat with shaking hands. Marcus followed, starting the engine and pulling away with controlled speed, fast enough to put distance between them and the kidnappers, slow enough not to trigger a violent response. Only when they'd left the parking lot and turned onto a main road did Marcus speak. "Are you hurt? Besides your head?" "No, they didn't. They just wanted me alive for the trade." "James is out of surgery. He's going to be fine. They stabbed him twice, but he'll recover." Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled force. "I'm sorry, Elena. I'm so sorry. This should never have happened. You traded intelligence for me. They said it could bury them. What did you give up?" "Documentation of their entire operation. Enough to put 30 people in federal prison if it ever reaches law enforcement." His jaw clenched. "I spent 3 years building that case, collecting evidence, and I gave it all away to get you back." Elena stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd sacrificed. "Why? You barely know me. Those files, they were worth more than one person's life." "No." Marcus finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "They weren't. Nothing is worth more than getting you out of there alive. I made that choice in the emergency room 2 weeks ago when I gave you my number. I don't abandon people under my protection." "Even when it costs you years of work?" "Even then." They drove in silence for several minutes, Elena trying to absorb everything that had happened. The kidnapping, the rescue, the trade, the casual way Marcus had valued her life over strategic advantage. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Somewhere secure while I clean up this mess. Those men, they're part of an organization I've been investigating. Corrupt logistics company with ties to international trafficking. The files I gave them were leverage, insurance against them making moves in my territory. He took a turn, heading out of the city. Without that documentation, the balance of power shifts. I'll need to rebuild, find new leverage, make it clear that tonight's victory doesn't mean they can push further. You're going to war with them. Probably. Unless I can negotiate a settlement first. He glanced at her. But that's not your concern. Your concern is recovering from tonight and deciding what happens next. What do you mean? I mean, this proved my point. You're not safe in my orbit. These people took you to get to me. Others might try the same thing. You need to decide if you want to stay under my protection knowing that risk, or if you'd prefer I arrange something else. Relocation, new identity, financial support to start over somewhere far from here. Elena thought about that. About running again, starting over, living in fear of different threats. About the strange partnership she'd developed with this dangerous man who kept choosing her safety over his own interests. I want to stay, she said. Marcus looked at her, surprise flashing across his features. You understand what that means? The risks you'd be taking? I understand that I spent 3 years trapped by one kind of violence. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life running from another kind. Elena met his gaze steadily. You said you don't abandon people under your protection. Well, I'm not abandoning the first person who's actually kept me safe. Whatever comes next, I'd rather face it here than alone somewhere else. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Respect maybe, or recognition. He nodded slowly. All right, then we do this properly. Better security, real training so you can protect yourself if needed. Full integration into the protective network. No more halfway measures. What does that involve? Learning to shoot, self-defense training, understanding the structure of my organization so you know who to trust, accepting that your life just got a lot more complicated. He pulled onto a private road that led to a property Elena didn't recognize. And it means we deal with the immediate threat first. Those men who took you, they think they won tonight. I need to make sure they understand that was a temporary victory, not a permanent shift. They arrived at what appeared to be a safe house, smaller than Marcus's estate, but well fortified and clearly designed for security. Inside, several of Marcus's people were waiting, including a doctor who immediately examined Elena despite her protests that she was fine. Mild concussion, the doctor pronounced after checking her pupils and asking her questions. You'll need to take it easy for a few days. Wake her every few hours tonight, he told Marcus. Watch for confusion, vomiting, severe headache. If any of those develop, call me immediately. After the doctor left, Marcus showed Elena to a bedroom and brought her water and painkillers. Get some rest. I'll be working downstairs, but I'll check on you regularly. Marcus, she stopped him at the door. Thank you for coming, for trading those files, for not giving up on me. I told you in the beginning I don't abandon people. He paused, his expression unreadable. Get some sleep, Elena. Tomorrow, we start rebuilding. Alone in the quiet room, Elena finally let the trauma of the night catch up to her. She cried. For James, bleeding on the sidewalk while trying to protect her. For Marcus, sacrificing years of work for someone he barely knew. For herself. And the realization that she'd traded David's intimate violence for a larger, more complex danger. But beneath the fear and the tears, she felt something else. The fierce determination to survive, to learn, to become someone who couldn't be used as leverage because she was strong enough to protect herself. She'd been rescued tonight, but she wouldn't need rescuing forever. That was the promise she made to herself as exhaustion finally pulled her under. She would stop being someone who needed saving and become someone who could stand on her own in whatever world she'd chosen to inhabit, even if that world was built on violence, secrets, and the dangerous protection of a man who ran a criminal empire. Elena woke every 2 hours through the night to Marcus's gentle check-ins, his hand on her shoulder and his quiet questions about her name, the date, where she was. Each time she answered correctly, he would nod and leave her to sleep again. By morning, the throbbing in her head had diminished to a dull ache, and she felt clear-headed enough to face whatever came next. She found Marcus in the kitchen, drinking coffee and reviewing something on his tablet. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, but his focus was absolute. "How's the head?" he asked without looking up. "Better. Still hurts, but manageable." Elena poured herself coffee and sat across from him. "Did you sleep?" "Not yet. Had things to handle." He set down the tablet and finally met her eyes. The organization that took you, they're testing boundaries, seeing if last night's victory gives them leverage for broader moves. I've spent the night making it clear that it doesn't. What does that mean? It means I've reminded certain people that intelligence files aren't my only form of leverage, that touching you again would be the last mistake they make. His tone was matter of fact, discussing violence the way other people discussed business negotiations. They're considering their options, so am I. Elena sipped her coffee, trying to process the casual way Marcus discussed what sounded like threats of retaliation. You said we'd deal with this properly. What does that actually look like? It starts with therapy. You've been through multiple traumas in quick succession. David, the kidnapping, all of it. You need professional help processing that before it calcifies into something harder to treat. He stood and refilled his coffee. I've arranged for you to see Dr. Chen 3 times a week. She's excellent and completely confidential. I already had an appointment scheduled with her. I know. I moved it up and increased the frequency. Marcus returned to his seat. Next is practical training. You said you want to stay in my orbit. That means you need to be able to protect yourself when my people can't. Self-defense, situational awareness, weapons training, if you're comfortable with it. I've never even held a gun. Then you'll learn, or you won't. It's your choice. But you should at least know how, even if you never carry. He studied her carefully. This isn't about turning you into something you're not, Elena. It's about giving you options. You spent 3 years with none. I'm offering you the opposite. Elena thought about the warehouse, the helplessness of being bound and used as leverage, thought about the terror of watching James fall and knowing she couldn't help him. I want to learn. All of it. Good. We start tomorrow. Marcus pulled up something on his tablet and turned it toward her. This is the structure of my organization. The people you can trust absolutely, the ones you can trust conditionally, and the ones you avoid. You need to understand how this world operates if you're going to survive in it. What followed was a crash course in criminal enterprise. Marcus walked her through his organization with the clinical precision of a professor outlining a syllabus. He ran logistics operations that moved everything from legitimate cargo to illegal contraband. He provided security services for businesses that operated in gray areas. He mediated disputes between factions that couldn't go to law enforcement, and he maintained a careful balance with authorities who knew exactly who he was but found him more useful cooperative than imprisoned. You're telling me the police know what you do? Elena asked, incredulous. Some of them. The ones who matter. Marcus's expression was neutral. I provide information about operations I'm not involved in. Help them close cases they couldn't solve otherwise. In exchange, they don't look too closely at my business. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. That's corruption. That's pragmatism. The world isn't black and white, Elena. It's 1,000 shades of gray, and the people who survive are the ones who can navigate that complexity. He switched screens on the tablet. These are the current threats to the organization. The logistics company that took you is at the top of the list. Below them are smaller operations, rivals who'd like my territory, former associates who think they deserve a larger piece of the operation, law enforcement officers I haven't been able to compromise. Elena studied the names and faces, trying to memorize them. How do you keep track of all this? Carefully, and with help from people who are very good at information management. He closed the tablet. You'll meet the key members of my team over the next few days. They need to know who you are and that you're under my direct protection. That should prevent another incident like last night. Should? Nothing's guaranteed in this world, but it significantly reduces the likelihood. Marcus stood, and Elena noticed the stiffness in his movements that suggested his gunshot wound was still healing. Get dressed. We're going to visit James in the hospital. He deserves to see that you're safe after what he went through protecting you. The drive to the hospital was quiet. Elena watched the city pass by, noticing details she'd never paid attention to before. Security cameras on corners, the patterns of foot traffic, the way certain cars seemed to appear too frequently to be coincidence. Marcus's world was teaching her to see threats in mundane circumstances. James was in a private room on the 4th floor, connected to monitors that beeped rhythmically. He looked pale but alert, and his face broke into a relieved smile when he saw Elena. Ms. Ward, thank God you're all right. Thanks to you. Elena approached his bedside, fighting the urge to cry. I'm so sorry. This happened because of me. This happened because violent men made choices, James corrected gently. I was doing my job. I'd do it again. Marcus stood at the foot of the bed, his expression unreadable. How are you feeling? Like I got stabbed twice, sir. But the doctors say I'll make a full recovery. James shifted slightly, wincing. Did we get them? Working on it. They made their move, but they won't get another one. Marcus's tone carried absolute certainty. Focus on healing. Your position will be waiting when you're ready, and you'll receive full medical coverage plus compensation for hazard duty. That's not necessary. It's not negotiable. Marcus's voice was firm but not unkind. You took knives for someone under my protection. That gets recognized. After they left James to rest, Elena and Marcus walked through the hospital corridors in silence. Elena was processing the reality that James had nearly died protecting her, that his loyalty to Marcus was absolute enough to risk his life for a woman he'd known for less than 2 weeks. They're all like that? She asked as they reached the car. Everyone who works for you? The good ones are. Loyalty is currency in my world. I pay well, I protect my people, and I expect absolute commitment in return. He opened her door. James knew the risks when he took the assignment. He chose to accept them. Because you make it worth his while. Because I've proven I'll do the same for him if circumstances require it. Marcus started the engine. Loyalty isn't bought, Elena. It's earned through consistent action. My people know I won't abandon them, so they don't abandon me. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Elena. Marcus had proven his commitment by trading years of intelligence work for her safe return, had earned her loyalty through consistent protection even when it cost him strategically. She was beginning to understand that in his world, these transactions of protection and loyalty were the foundation of everything. Over the next week, Elena's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. She started therapy with Dr. Chen, a woman whose gentle persistence helped Elena unpack 3 years of abuse plus the fresh trauma of kidnapping. The sessions were brutal, forcing her to examine patterns she'd buried and emotions she'd suppressed. But they were also liberating, giving her tools to process fear instead of being controlled by it. The physical training was equally transformative. Marcus assigned her to work with a woman named Sarah, not the housekeeper she'd met that first morning, but a combat instructor with 20 years of military experience. Sarah was patient but demanding, teaching Elena how to read body language, how to create distance when threatened, how to use common objects as weapons. You're not trying to win fights, Sarah explained during their third session. You're trying to create opportunities to escape. Everything I'm teaching you is about buying yourself time and distance. Elena learned to strike vulnerable points, eyes, throat, groin. Learned to break basic holds and create space. Learned that her smaller size could be an advantage if she used speed and precision instead of trying to match strength. The weapons training was harder. Marcus took her to a private range himself, starting with basic handgun safety and building from there. Elena's hands shook the first time she held the gun, memories of David's violence making her nauseous. We can stop, Marcus said quietly, watching her. You don't have to do this. No, I need to. Elena forced herself to breathe through the fear. Show me again. He moved behind her, adjusting her grip and stance with professional detachment. His hands were steady where hers trembled, his voice calm as he walked her through sight alignment and trigger control. By the end of the session, Elena had put 5 rounds through the center of the target, and the sick feeling had transformed into something like confidence. Good, Marcus said, securing the weapon. You're a natural. I don't feel natural. I feel terrified. Fear is useful. It keeps you alert. It's panic that gets you killed. He led her out of the range. The goal isn't to make you fearless. It's to make you functional, despite the fear. Between training sessions, Elena learned the operational structure of Marcus's organization. She met his second-in-command, a woman named Victoria, who ran the logistics operations with ruthless efficiency. Met his head of security, a former federal agent named Chen, who'd switched sides for reasons he didn't elaborate on. Met the lawyers, the accountants, the technology specialists who kept the entire enterprise running smoothly. Each introduction came with the same message. Elena was under Marcus's direct protection, and any threat to her would be treated as a threat to him personally. The message was received with varying degrees of acknowledgement, but Elena noticed that people's demeanors changed when they understood her status. She wasn't just another person Marcus had helped. She was something more, though she couldn't quite define what. 2 weeks after the kidnapping, Marcus called her to his office at the estate. She'd been staying at the safe house, but visited the main property regularly for meetings and training. The office felt more familiar now, less intimidating. "We have a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "The organization that took you, they've rejected my attempts at negotiation. They think last night's victory means they can push for more territory, more influence. They're wrong." Elena settled into the chair across from him. "What are you going to do?" "End it. Permanently." He turned his tablet toward her, showing surveillance photos of various locations. "These are their primary operations: distribution centers, front companies, meeting locations. I'm going to dismantle them systematically until they have nothing left to push with." "You're going to war." "I'm going to win a war they started when they took you." Marcus's expression was hard. "But I wanted you to know before it happens. Things are going to get violent. There will be casualties, and there's a possibility that they'll strike at me through you again before this is over." Elena thought about that, about the choice she'd made to stay, to accept the complications of Marcus's protection, about the strange partnership they'd developed through crisis and recovery. "What do you need from me?" "Stay at the safe house. Maintain your security protocols. Continue your training." He paused. "And understand that what I'm about to do, it's not just about protecting you. It's about making it clear that certain lines can't be crossed. They used you as leverage. That can't be allowed to succeed." "When does it start?" "Tonight. My people are moving on their distribution centers as we speak. By morning, they'll have lost significant operational capacity." Marcus stood, moving to the window. "This will take a week, maybe 2, and then it will be over." Elena joined him at the window, looking out at the grounds. "I want to help." He turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. "This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you traded those intelligence files for my life. You made it my fight when you gave me protection that comes with these complications." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not asking to be on the front lines, but I can be useful. I can monitor communications, track patterns, whatever you need that doesn't require me to be in the field. Let me contribute." Marcus studied her for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing the risks against the benefits of her involvement. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Victoria can use help with logistics coordination. But Elena, if at any point this becomes too much, if you want to step back, you tell me. Understood?" "Understood." What followed was the most intense 2 weeks of Elena's life. She worked alongside Victoria, learning to track operations across the city, coordinate Marcus's people as they systematically dismantled their rivals' infrastructure. She watched through surveillance feeds as warehouses were raided, as key personnel were extracted or eliminated, as the careful architecture of a criminal enterprise was reduced to rubble. The violence was surgical, precise. Marcus's people moved with professional efficiency, minimizing collateral damage while maximizing operational impact. But it was still violence, and Elena had to reconcile her horror at what she was witnessing with the understanding that this brutality was protecting her and countless others who existed under Marcus's umbrella. "You're doing well," Victoria said during one long night of coordination. "Most people can't stomach this kind of work." "I spent 3 years being terrorized by someone who claimed to love me," Elena replied, her eyes on the monitors. "This is different. This is violence with a purpose I can understand." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Marcus said you were strong. I wasn't sure I believed him. I do now." By the end of the second week, the rival organization had been effectively neutralized. Their leadership was in federal custody, courtesy of anonymous tips backed by the intelligence Marcus had allegedly deleted after Elena's rescue. Their operations had been absorbed or destroyed, and their remaining personnel had either joined Marcus's organization or fled the city entirely. Elena attended the final briefing, watching as Marcus outlined the new territorial arrangements to his key people. He spoke with the authority of someone who'd won decisively, but also with the pragmatism of someone who knew that victories were temporary without proper consolidation. "The message is sent," he concluded. "We protect our own. We don't tolerate threats to our people, and we respond to aggression with overwhelming force." Any questions? No one had questions. The meeting dispersed, and Elena found herself alone with Marcus in the conference room. It's over? She asked. This particular conflict is over. There will be others. He gathered his notes, favoring his shoulder less than he had 2 weeks ago. But you're safe now. They won't make another move against you, and anyone else considering it has been dissuaded by the example we just made. Elena processed that. Safety purchased through systematic violence. Protection built on the ruins of an enemy organization. She should have felt guilty. Instead, she felt relieved. Thank you, she said quietly. Marcus looked at her, his expression softening slightly. You don't need to thank me for this. You were part of it. You helped coordinate half the operations we ran. This victory is partly yours. I never thought I'd be coordinating criminal operations. I never thought I'd train an elementary school teacher to be part of my organization. He smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious features. We're both full of surprises. The next morning, Elena returned to her apartment for the first time since the kidnapping. It had been cleaned, secured, and upgraded with additional safety features. But it felt different now, not like a sanctuary, but like a way station between her old life and whatever came next. She called the school principal and requested a leave of absence for the remainder of the semester. Claimed family emergency, which wasn't entirely false. Her family situation had certainly become an emergency, just not in the conventional sense. Then she called Dr. Chen and scheduled an additional session. I need to talk about what I've been doing, she said when the therapist answered. The choices I've made. I need to understand if I'm becoming someone I can live with or someone I'll eventually hate. Come in tomorrow, Dr. Chen said. We'll work through it together. The session was brutal but necessary. Doctor, Chen didn't judge Elena's involvement in Marcus's operations, but she did push her to examine her motivations and limits. You've gone from one extreme to another, the therapist observed. From total helplessness with David to active participation in violence through Marcus's organization. The question is whether you're finding your actual center or just swinging to the opposite pole. I don't know, Elena admitted. I just know that I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not pretending the world is safe when it isn't. I'm learning to operate in the reality that exists, not the one I wish existed. That's valid. But be careful that adapting to reality doesn't mean losing yourself in it. Dr. Chen leaned forward. You're stronger than you were a month ago. You're more capable, more aware, more functional. But Elena, you're also processing trauma by surrounding yourself with the very thing that traumatized you, violence. At some point, you'll need to figure out who you are when you're not in crisis mode. The observation stayed with Elena as she left the session. Who was she when she wasn't in crisis? She'd spent 3 years defined by David's abuse, and the last month defined by escape and survival. She'd never had the space to just exist without threat. She mentioned this to Marcus that evening over dinner at his estate. He'd started inviting her to share meals, a ritual that felt less like business and more like genuine companionship. My therapist thinks I'm using your world to process trauma instead of actually healing. Marcus considered that while cutting his steak. Is she right? Maybe. Probably. Elena pushed food around her plate. I went from being controlled by David to being protected by you. I haven't really been independent at all. So be independent. Marcus met her eyes. I'm not David, Elena. I'm not keeping you here. If you want to step back, find your own path, figure out who you are without crisis or protection. Do it. The apartment is yours regardless. The financial support continues. You walk away with my blessing and my contact information in case you ever need help. Just like that? Just like that. He set down his fork. I helped you because you needed help, not because I expected you to become part of my organization. If working with me is preventing you from healing, then the right thing is for you to step back. Elena absorbed that, the casual way he offered her freedom she hadn't even asked for. What if I don't want to step back? What if I want to keep working with you but also figure out who I am outside of crisis? Then we figure that out together. Marcus's expression was thoughtful. You could return to teaching part-time. Keep training and working with Victoria, but not at the intensity of the last 2 weeks. Find a balance that lets you explore both sides of yourself. You'd be okay with that? Having someone in your organization who's only partially committed? I'd prefer having someone who's present by choice rather than necessity. He smiled slightly. Besides, you've proven yourself useful. Victoria's been asking if you're available for more logistics work. Apparently you have a gift for pattern recognition. They spent the rest of dinner discussing possibilities. Elena could return to teaching in the new semester, work with Marcus's organization on a consulting basis, maintain her training but reduce the intensity. It wasn't the clean binary of being all in or all out. It was a middle path that acknowledged complexity. Over the following month, Elena built that middle path. She returned to Jefferson Elementary 3 days a week, reclaiming the part of herself that found meaning in teaching second graders to read and add and navigate their social worlds. The other 2 days, she worked with Victoria on logistics coordination, applying her pattern recognition skills to route optimization and security protocols. The self-defense training continued, as did her therapy sessions. She learned to shoot with increasing proficiency and practiced situational awareness until it became second nature. She studied Marcus's organization not as a crisis participant, but as someone genuinely interested in understanding how power operated in the shadows. And slowly, carefully, she began to define herself outside of trauma. She reconnected with Melissa, though she couldn't tell her friend the full truth about her new life. She started running in the mornings, reclaiming her body from the fear that had inhabited it for so long. She read poetry again, finding beauty in language that wasn't about survival or strategy. David's trial came and went. He pled guilty to assault and domestic violence charges, accepting a plea deal that put him in prison for 5 years. Elena attended the sentencing, sitting in the gallery with Marcus beside her. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Elena stood and spoke clearly. I spent 3 years believing I deserved what he did to me. I was wrong. What happened was his choice, his violence, his responsibility. I'm not his victim anymore. I'm a survivor who's building a life he can never touch again. The judge nodded approvingly and delivered the sentence. Elena walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than she had in years. How do you feel? Marcus asked as they reached his car. Like a door just closed. Like I can finally move forward without looking back. She smiled, genuine and unforced. Thank you for being here. Always. That evening, Marcus invited Elena to a dinner at his estate with some of his key people. Not a business meeting, but a celebration of sorts, the conclusion of multiple crises, the successful defense of their territory, the return to something resembling stability. Elena dressed carefully, choosing a dress that made her feel confident rather than defensive. When she arrived at the estate, she found Victoria, Chen, and several others she'd worked with over the past month. They welcomed her warmly, treating her less like Marcus's protected charity case and more like a colleague who'd proven her worth. During dinner, Victoria raised a glass. To Elena, who survived being kidnapped, helped us dismantle an enemy organization, and proved that elementary school teachers are more dangerous than anyone gives them credit for. Everyone laughed and drank, and Elena felt something unfamiliar. Belonging. Not the trapped belonging of David's apartment, but the chosen belonging of people who'd seen her at her worst and still valued her presence. After dinner, Marcus found her on the terrace overlooking the grounds. You seem different tonight, he observed. Lighter. I feel different. For the first time since I can remember, I'm not afraid. Elena looked out at the darkness beyond the estate lights. I'm not naive. I know there will be new threats, new crises, but I'm not afraid of them anymore. I know I can handle whatever comes. You can. Marcus stood beside her, close but not touching. You've become someone formidable, Elena, someone who survived hell and came out stronger. I had help. You had support, but the work was yours. He turned to face her. I'm proud of you. I don't say that lightly. Elena met his eyes, seeing something in them she hadn't noticed before, or perhaps had chosen not to notice. Respect, certainly. Admiration. But also something deeper, more complicated. Marcus, she said quietly, what are we doing here? This partnership we've built. What is it exactly? He was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I don't know. I started by trying to help you escape an impossible situation. Somewhere along the way, it became something else. Something I didn't plan for. Something like what? Something like caring whether you're happy beyond just keeping you safe. Something like wanting you around not because you're useful, but because I enjoy your company. He smiled slightly. something inconvenient and complicated. Elena's heart raced, but not with fear. Inconvenient how? Because you deserve better than a life built around my world. Because getting involved with me would mean accepting complications you've already had too much of. He looked away. Because I'm not sure I can offer you anything that doesn't come with conditions and risks. What if I'm not looking for simple? Elena stepped closer. What if I've learned that the complicated things are sometimes the most worth having? Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elena saw vulnerability beneath his usual control. I won't be another person who controls you, who defines your choices or limits your freedom. Then don't be. Elena reached for his hand, the gesture deliberate and chosen. Be someone who stands beside me while I figure out who I am. Be someone who challenges me to be stronger without demanding I be different. Be someone who chose me when he didn't have to and keeps choosing me every day after. I can do that, Marcus said quietly. If you're sure. I'm sure. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, asking permission with every movement. Elena kissed him back, tasting possibility and risk, and the strange alchemy of two damaged people choosing to trust each other with their respective scars. When they finally separated, Elena was smiling. So what now? Now we figure this out as we go. No rush, no pressure, just honest exploration of whatever this becomes. Marcus kept her hand in his. But Elena, if this stops working for you, if I become another cage instead of a partnership, you tell me. Promise me that. I promise, and you promise me the same. If I become a liability or a burden instead of an equal, you tell me. Deal. They stood together on the terrace, watching the city lights in the distance. Two survivors who'd found each other through violence and chosen to build something different together. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Elena had once imagined. It was better, real, complicated, and entirely theirs. The months that followed their acknowledgement of feelings were a study in careful navigation. Elena and Marcus moved toward each other in increments, testing boundaries and building trust that went deeper than the crisis-forged bond that had brought them together. They had dinner twice a week, sometimes at the estate, sometimes at quiet restaurants where Marcus's security maintained discreet distance. They talked about everything: her childhood, his rise through the criminal underworld, the complicated ethics of operating in spaces the law couldn't reach. Elena continued teaching 3 days a week, finding joy in the simple clarity of helping 7-year-olds discover reading. Her students knew nothing of her double life, and she wanted to keep it that way. This part of herself remained untouched by Marcus's world, a sanctuary of normalcy she protected fiercely. The other 2 days, she worked with Victoria on increasingly complex operations. Elena discovered she had an aptitude for strategic thinking, for seeing patterns in data that others missed. She helped optimize supply chains, identify security vulnerabilities, and coordinate logistics across Marcus's expanding legitimate business interests. Because alongside the criminal enterprise, Marcus was building something legal, a security consulting firm, a logistics company, investments that could eventually eclipse the illegal operations. I'm not getting younger, he told Elena one evening as they reviewed quarterly reports, and I'd prefer to leave behind something sustainable rather than a power vacuum that triggers another war. You're planning your exit from the criminal side? Planning is generous. Considering it seriously, maybe. He gestured to the financial projections on his tablet. The legitimate businesses are profitable. In another 5 years, they could generate more revenue than the illegal operations. It would mean restructuring, transitioning key people, finding ways to divest from the criminal work without creating instability. Elena studied the numbers, her business degree from a lifetime ago suddenly relevant again. You'd need a transition plan, gradual handoff of territory, negotiated exits from partnerships, careful management of the personnel who can't make the shift to legitimate work. Exactly, which is why I wanted your input. Marcus met her eyes. If we're building something together, and I think we are, then you should have a say in what that future looks like. This affects you too. The casual inclusion in his long-term planning made Elena's heart skip. They'd been cautious about defining their relationship, letting it develop organically. But this felt like a declaration of intent, an acknowledgement that their futures were becoming intertwined. I think you should do it, she said. Not because I'm uncomfortable with the criminal work. I've made my peace with that complexity. but because you deserve a life that isn't constantly under threat. Because we both deserve futures that don't require looking over our shoulders. Marcus smiled, the expression still rare enough to feel like a gift. Then we build toward that. It won't be quick or easy, but it's possible. That conversation marked a shift. They began planning not just for immediate stability, but for long-term transformation. Marcus started delegating more of the criminal operations to his lieutenants, while focusing on expanding the legitimate businesses. Elena took on a formal role as strategic consultant, her official title obscuring the fact that she was helping plan the gradual dismantling of a criminal empire. The work was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Elena learned about money laundering and how to reverse it, how to transition assets from illegal to legal sources through careful documentation and strategic investment. She learned about personnel management when the personnel included former enforcers who needed new career paths. She learned about negotiation when the negotiations involved convincing rival organizations that Marcus's withdrawal from territory was opportunity rather than weakness. Through it all, her relationship with Marcus deepened. They moved past the careful testing phase into something more substantial. Marcus gave her a key to the estate and told her she was welcome any time. Elena invited him to her apartment for quiet evenings, where they cooked together and talked about nothing important. They attended a symphony together, and Elena watched Marcus visibly relax into something approaching normalcy. They went hiking in the mountains, and she saw him away from the weight of his organization for the first time. "I could get used to this," he admitted as they sat on a ridge overlooking the valley. "Being someone besides the person who runs everything. You're allowed to just be Marcus sometimes. Not Marcus Valente, the crime boss or the business mogul, just a person who exists. I'm not sure I remember how to be just a person." "Then we'll figure it out together." Elena leaned against his shoulder, comfortable with the contact in a way she'd never been with David. Because this was chosen, mutual, free of the power dynamics that had poisoned her last relationship. 6 months into their official relationship, Marcus asked Elena to move into the estate. She considered it carefully, discussing the implications with Dr. Chen during therapy. "Are you moving in because you want to or because it feels expected?" the therapist asked. "I want to, but I also worry that I'm repeating patterns, moving from David's apartment to Marcus's protection, defining myself through relationships with men." "That's a valid concern. But there's a crucial difference here. You have your own space, your own income, your own life separate from Marcus. Moving into the estate doesn't erase that unless you let it." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "The question is whether you're choosing this from a place of strength or weakness. Do you need Marcus's home, or do you want to share space with someone you love?" Elena thought about that distinction. Need versus want. Dependence versus choice. "I want to," she said finally. "I love him. And I want to build a life with him that includes sharing space." "Then do it. But maintain your boundaries. Keep your apartment as a safety net if you need it. Keep your independent income and your teaching. Don't lose yourself in this relationship just because it's healthier than the last one." Elena took that advice seriously. She moved into the estate but kept her apartment, using it as an office, an occasional retreat when she needed space. She continued teaching, continued her work with Victoria, continued her therapy and training. She built a life that included Marcus without being defined by him. The estate staff adjusted to her presence with varying degrees of ease. Sarah, the combat instructor, became something like a friend. Victoria treated her as a valued colleague. Chen, the head of security, remained professionally distant but respectful. And Marcus's household staff accepted her with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to their employer's choices. It was Sarah who first mentioned the persistent threat still lurking in the background. They were training in the estate's private gym, working on knife defense, when Sarah paused mid-drill. "I need to tell you something. There's been chatter about residual elements from the organization we dismantled. Nothing concrete, but enough to warrant attention." Elena straightened, her pulse quickening. "What kind of chatter?" "The kind that suggests some people didn't learn their lesson about using you as leverage. Chen's monitoring the situation, and Marcus has authorized preemptive measures, but you should be aware." "Does Marcus know you're telling me this?" "He asked me to. Said you deserve to know about threats rather than being protected from information." Sarah resumed her fighting stance. "Now defend against this angle." Elena appreciated Marcus's honesty, even as the information unsettled her. That evening, she found him in his office reviewing surveillance reports. Sarah told me about the chatter. Marcus looked up, his expression neutral but not dismissive. I was going to brief you tonight. Chen thinks it's mostly talk, remnants who are bitter about how things ended but don't have the resources or organization to act on it. But we're treating it seriously. What does preemptive measures mean? It means we're identifying the people making noise and giving them incentives to stop. Financial compensation for some, relocation assistance for others, and for the ones who insist on being problems. More permanent solutions. Elena sat across from him, processing the casual way he discussed eliminating threats. The permanent solutions? You mean killing them? If necessary, I'd prefer not to. It attracts attention and creates new problems. But I won't leave active threats to your safety unaddressed. His gaze was steady. Does that bother you? She thought about it honestly. 6 months ago, it would have horrified her. Now, understanding the reality of Marcus's world and the constant calculations required to maintain safety, she found her feelings more complicated. It bothers me that it has to happen, but I understand why it does. She met his eyes. I trust you to make those decisions as ethically as possible within an inherently unethical framework. Marcus nodded slowly. That's all I can ask. And Elena, if you ever reach a point where you can't reconcile these choices with your values, if this becomes too much, you tell me. I meant what I said about not becoming another cage. I know you did, and I will. She stood and moved behind his chair, resting her hands on his shoulders. But right now, I'm exactly where I choose to be. The threat Sarah mentioned materialized 2 weeks later in the form of surveillance photos delivered to Elena's apartment. Someone had been watching her, documenting her movements between the estate and the school. The message was clear. We can reach you whenever we want. Marcus's response was immediate and decisive. He pulled Elena from her teaching schedule temporarily, increased security to levels that felt suffocating, and authorized Chen to handle the threat with extreme prejudice. Elena watched from the estate's security center as Marcus's people tracked down the source of the photos, identified the small cell of former rivals who'd organized the surveillance, and systematically removed them from the equation. The operation took 3 days. Elena monitored communications with Victoria, coordinated safe houses for witnesses who needed protection, and watched as Marcus orchestrated violence with the precision of a surgeon. It wasn't the wholesale dismantling of an organization like before. It was targeted, specific, designed to eliminate a threat while sending a message to anyone else considering similar action. When it was over, Chen presented Marcus with confirmation that all threats had been neutralized. Marcus reviewed the report, made some notes, and then turned to Elena. It's done. The people who are watching you won't be a problem again. And I've put word out through channels that you are permanently off limits. Anyone who touches you answers to me personally, and they've seen what that means. Elena absorbed that. Safety purchased through violence, protection built on the bodies of people who'd threatened her. She should have felt guilty, should have questioned the morality of it all. Instead, she felt grateful and exhausted and ready for this chapter to finally close. Thank you, she said quietly. You don't need to thank me for protecting you. That's not negotiable. Marcus stood and pulled her into his arms, and Elena let herself lean into the embrace. But this should be the last major threat. We've eliminated the organization that started this, cleaned up the remnants, and made it clear that targeting you is suicide. You should be able to return to your life without constant fear. What about your transition out of the criminal work? Does this complicate that? Actually, it helps. We demonstrated strength, which gives us leverage in negotiations. Several organizations have already reached out about taking over territory we're planning to exit from. The violence serves the transition strategy. Elena pulled back to look at him. You planned this. You used the threat against me as an opportunity to advance your exit strategy. But I protected you and used the situation strategically. Both things can be true. Marcus's expression was unapologetic. I won't risk your safety for business advantage, but I also won't waste opportunities when they present themselves. That's how this world works. She understood that now in a way she couldn't have months ago. The constant calculation, the layered strategies, the way every action served multiple purposes. It was exhausting and brilliant and exactly the kind of complexity Marcus navigated daily. Teach me, she said suddenly. Not just the logistics and coordination. I'm learning that from Victoria, but the strategic thinking, the way you see 3 moves ahead and position everything to your advantage. I want to understand how you think. Marcus studied her carefully. Why? Because if we're building a future together, I need to be your equal in this. Not just someone you protect or someone who helps with operations. I need to understand the game at the level you play it. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. All right, but Elena, understanding how I think means seeing some ugly truths about how power operates. Are you sure you want that? I'm sure. Over the following months, Marcus became her teacher in ways that went beyond combat training or operational logistics. He showed her how to read people, identify their motivations and vulnerabilities. He taught her to think in terms of leverage and incentives, to understand that everyone wanted something, and the key was figuring out what. He walked her through past negotiations, explaining the psychology behind each decision, the careful balance of threat and reward that made people comply. Elena proved an apt student. Her background in teaching helped. She understood learning styles and how to absorb complex information. And her experience with David had taught her to read subtext, to understand the things people didn't say. She applied those skills to Marcus's lessons and found herself developing an intuition for strategy that surprised them both. "You're better at this than I expected," Marcus admitted one evening as they reviewed a negotiation she'd helped structure. "You found leverage I didn't see." "I had a good teacher," Elena smiled, "and I spent 3 years learning to read subtext and predict violence. Turns out those skills transfer." Marcus pulled her close, and Elena felt the particular contentment of being fully known and accepted. With David, she'd hidden her thoughts and feelings, made herself small to survive. With Marcus, she could be complex and strategic and still soft in the moments that mattered. It was a balance she'd never thought possible. As Elena's strategic acumen developed, so did her role in Marcus's organization. She became more than a logistics consultant or protected partner. She became an actual advisor, someone Marcus consulted on major decisions. Victoria started deferring to her judgment on certain operations. Chen included her in security briefings. And Marcus's other key people began treating her as someone with real authority rather than just proximity to power. The shift culminated when Marcus asked her to sit in on a major negotiation with a rival organization about territory transitions. Elena had helped develop the strategy, but she'd expected to remain behind the scenes. Instead, Marcus wanted her present as a visible member of his leadership. "Are you sure?" she asked the night before the meeting. "I'm not part of your organization officially. Won't that seem strange? You're part of my life, which makes you part of my organization by extension. And you're the person who structured this entire negotiation. You should be there to see it through." He cupped her face gently. "Besides, I want them to know that you're not just under my protection. You're someone with power in your own right. That matters." The negotiation took place in a neutral location, a conference room in a hotel that catered to exactly this kind of gray area business. Marcus's people arrived first, establishing control of the space. Then the rival organization's representatives entered, led by a man named Petrov, who ran the largest competing criminal enterprise in the region. Elena sat beside Marcus, notebook open, projecting calm competence while her heart raced. This was different from coordinating operations remotely. This was face-to-face negotiation with people who solved problems through violence. Petrov's gaze lingered on her briefly before focusing on Marcus. "This is the teacher everyone's been talking about? This is Elena Ward, my strategic advisor and partner." Marcus's tone made it clear that both titles carried equal weight. She developed the transition framework we're proposing. Petrov's expression shifted to something like respect. "Then let's hear it." Elena walked them through the proposal she'd developed with Marcus. He would withdraw from specific territories over a staggered timeline, allowing Petrov's organization to absorb operations without creating power vacuums. In exchange, Petrov would provide guarantees of non-interference with Marcus's legitimate businesses and offer employment opportunities for Marcus's people who couldn't transition to legal work. The framework included financial considerations, dispute resolution mechanisms, and clear boundaries around enforcement. As she spoke, Elena watched Petrov's reactions, adjusting her presentation based on what resonated and what triggered resistance. It was like teaching, she realized, understanding your audience and adapting your approach to facilitate learning. Except instead of second graders learning to read, she was helping hardened criminals understand mutual benefit. The negotiation lasted 3 hours. Elena fielded questions about specific provisions, clarified ambiguous language, and gently redirected conversations that veered toward confrontation. By the end, Petrov was addressing his questions to her as often as to Marcus, recognizing that she understood the framework better than anyone. "This could work," Petrov finally said. "It's more elegant than I expected. Usually these transitions are messy, violent. This framework actually prevents that." "That's the goal," Elena replied. "Violence is expensive and attracts attention. This approach benefits everyone." Petrov smiled and Elena saw calculation behind the expression. "Marcus, your teacher is dangerous. I hope you know that." "I do," Marcus said with obvious pride. "That's why she's here." They shook hands on the basic framework, agreeing to finalize details over the next month. As Petrov's people filed out, he paused beside Elena. "If you ever tire of working for Valente, my organization could use someone with your skills." Marcus tensed beside her, but Elena handled it smoothly. "I appreciate the compliment, but I'm exactly where I want to be." After Petrov left, Marcus pulled Elena into a quiet corner. "You were brilliant. Every question, every objection, you handled it perfectly." "I was terrified the entire time." "You didn't show it. You projected absolute confidence and competence." He kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you and grateful you're using these skills to help build something legitimate instead of just managing criminal operations." "We're building it together," Elena corrected. "That's the point." Over the next year, Elena and Marcus executed the transition framework she'd developed. Territory was transferred to Petrov's organization in carefully managed phases. Personnel were transitioned to legitimate businesses or retired with generous severance packages. Financial assets were systematically cleaned and reinvested in legal ventures. And gradually, methodically, Marcus extracted himself from the criminal enterprise that had defined his adult life. It wasn't seamless. There were complications, minor conflicts, moments when violence seemed inevitable and had to be carefully diffused. But the framework held, and Elena's diplomatic skills proved as valuable as Marcus's strategic acumen. Together, they navigated a transformation that most people in their position attempted and failed. Elena continued teaching through it all, though she reduced to 2 days a week as her consulting work expanded. Jefferson Elementary became her anchor to normalcy, the place where she was just Ms. Ward, who taught second grade and loved helping children discover reading. Her colleagues knew she'd gotten involved with someone successful, but they didn't know the details. Elena kept that part of her life carefully compartmentalized, protecting both worlds from contamination. Melissa was the only person who got glimpses of both sides. They met for drinks monthly, and Elena told her as much as she could without revealing specifics. "So your mysterious benefactor became your boyfriend and then your business partner?" Melissa asked over wine one evening. "Something like that. It's complicated, but good complicated." "And you're happy? Actually happy? Not just safe?" Elena considered the question honestly. "I'm happy. I'm challenged. I'm growing. I'm building something meaningful with someone I love and respect. It's not simple, and it's definitely not conventional. But it's mine." "Then I'm happy for you." Melissa raised her glass. "You deserve good things, Elena. After everything you went through with David, you deserve someone who sees your worth." That conversation stayed with Elena. She did deserve good things. Deserve partnership instead of control. Challenge instead of suppression, love that expanded her rather than diminished her. And somehow, against all probability, she'd found it with a man whose profession should have made him the worst possible choice. 18 months after the kidnapping that had nearly destroyed everything, Marcus's legitimate businesses were generating 70% of his revenue. The criminal operations had been reduced to minimal involvement, primarily consulting for organizations transitioning toward legitimate business, leveraging his expertise without active participation. He maintained relationships with key people in that world, but more as a respected former player than an active participant. One evening, he asked Elena to meet him at a restaurant they'd been to on their third date. She arrived to find him waiting at their usual table, looking unusually nervous. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong. But I need to ask you something important." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. We've built something incredible together. You helped me transition away from a life I was trapped in, just like I helped you escape David. We've become partners in every sense, personal, professional, strategic, and I can't imagine my future without you in it. Elena's heart started racing as she realized where this was going. I know we've talked about not rushing things, about letting this develop naturally. But Elena, we've been through enough together that I know this is what I want. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Will you marry me? Elena looked at the ring, elegant and understated, exactly her style, and felt emotion overwhelm her. She thought about the terrified woman who'd called a stranger's number from a hospital waiting room. Thought about the journey from that moment to this one, all the violence and healing and growth. Thought about who she'd become and who Marcus was beyond the surface. Yes, she said, her voice thick with tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that felt like promise and choice and the future they'd build together. When they finally separated, Elena was laughing and crying simultaneously. I never thought I'd get married again. After David, I thought I was too broken for this. You were never broken. You were surviving. Marcus held her close. And now you're thriving. We both are. They spent the rest of the evening planning a future that looked nothing like either of them had imagined. A small wedding, intimate and deliberate. Elena would continue teaching and consulting. Marcus would run his legitimate businesses and mentor people transitioning out of criminal work. They would build something that honored both their pasts and their chosen future. The wedding took place 6 months later in the gardens of Marcus's estate. Elena wore a simple dress that made her feel beautiful without being ostentatious. Marcus wore a suit and an expression of quiet joy that transformed his usually serious features. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about partnership and honesty, and choosing each other every day. Melissa was there, one of only 20 guests. Victoria stood as Elena's witness, having become one of her closest friends. Chen and Sarah attended, along with key members of Marcus's team who'd accepted Elena as one of their own. Dr. Chen was invited and came, the only person besides Melissa who understood the full arc of Elena's transformation. The ceremony was brief and meaningful. When the officiant pronounced them married, Elena kissed her husband and felt the click of everything falling into place. This was what she'd been building toward. Not just safety from David, but a life she'd actively chosen. A partnership with someone who challenged her to be stronger without demanding she be different. The reception was elegant and understated. Elena danced with Marcus, with Melissa, with Victoria. She accepted congratulations from people who'd helped protect her, teach her, integrate her into a world she'd never imagined inhabiting. And she felt grateful for every strange turn that had led her here. Late in the evening, she found herself alone with Dr. Chen on the terrace where she and Marcus had first acknowledged their feelings months ago. How are you feeling? The therapist asked. Happy. Grounded. Like I've finally figured out who I am when I'm not defined by crisis or trauma. Elena looked out at the gardens where guests mingled. Is that real, or am I just experiencing a temporary high? It's real. You've done the work, Elena. The therapy, the self-examination, the conscious choice to build something healthy. This isn't you escaping one situation and falling into another. This is you actively creating the life you want. Dr. Chen smiled. I'm proud of you. When you first came to see me, you were so fragile. Look at you now. Elena thought about that fragile woman who'd been terrified of everything. She was still in there somewhere, part of Elena's history. But she didn't define Elena anymore. She was just one chapter in a longer story. Marcus found her later, pulling her away from conversations for a quiet moment alone. Happy? He asked. Incredibly. You? More than I knew was possible. He held her close, and Elena breathed in his familiar scent. Thank you for choosing this. For choosing me. Thank you for giving me real choices. For seeing me when I was invisible. Elena pulled back to look at him. We did this right, didn't we? Built something that honors both of us? We did. And we'll keep doing it right, one choice at a time. They returned to their guests, to the celebration of two people who'd found each other through violence and chosen to build something different. Elena danced with her husband under stars that felt like promise, surrounded by people who'd helped her transform from victim to survivor, to someone who'd reclaimed agency over every aspect of her life. 3 years after walking into that emergency room with a broken wrist and a broken spirit, Elena Ward, now Elena Valente, stood in her own power. She taught children to read, consulted on complex business strategies, trained in combat techniques, and loved a man who'd proven that protection and partnership could coexist. She visited James in his new role as head of personal security, gratefully remembering his sacrifice. She worked with Victoria on expanding their legitimate consulting business. She maintained her apartment as a reminder that she always had options. And every morning, she woke up beside Marcus and chose him again. Chose the complexity, the challenge, the life they were building together. Not because she needed him for safety or survival, but because she wanted the partnership they'd created. Some rescues were immediate, the phone call, the extraction, the shelter from immediate threat. But the real rescue was slower, built through therapy and training and conscious choice. Elena had been rescued from David's apartment that night weeks ago, but she'd rescued herself from the identity of victim through every deliberate decision that followed. On a quiet Sunday morning, months after the wedding, Elena sat with Marcus over coffee and the newspapers. He was reviewing business reports. She was grading papers from her students. It was domestic and normal, and exactly the kind of peaceful Elena had once thought impossible. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, noticing her smile. "That I'm happy, that I chose this life and I'd choose it again." She reached across the table for his hand. That sometimes the most dangerous choices lead to the safest places. Marcus smiled, that rare expression she'd learned to treasure. Sometimes the broken pieces fit together better than anything whole could have. They sat in comfortable silence, two survivors who'd found each other in crisis and built something unbreakable through choice and commitment. It wasn't the ending Elena had imagined when she'd fled David's apartment. It was better, real and complicated and entirely earned. The woman who'd once believed she deserved violence had become someone who knew her worth. The man who'd built an empire on force had learned that partnership required vulnerability. Together, they'd created something that defied easy categorization, a life built on honest choices, mutual respect, and the fierce determination to be better than their circumstances suggested they could be. Elena returned her attention to grading papers, making encouraging notes for her students about their progress. Tomorrow, she'd return to teaching, to helping second graders discover the magic of reading. Next week, she'd work with Victoria on finalizing a major consulting contract. And every day, she'd continue building the life she'd chosen with the man she loved. It was complex and unconventional and absolutely hers, and that made it perfect.